Hello and welcome to the trade setup. In this video we are looking at NioCorp developments. It is time for another update. Additionally, an update was requested here by one of the followers and I wanted to let you know that anyone can make these requests and I'll most likely cover them, especially if there is an actionable trade setup to follow. And in the case of this chart, we actually started off with a quite decent movement to the upside. We had here a potential initial 5-wave move. In a wave 1 we had a correction within a large wave 2, in which unfortunately we did break below the area of support. Now this wasn't very sustained, especially if you consider how large this correction has been. It took like nearly 10 years to complete this correction. It was slightly below the area of support for a few months, but nothing too significant, and in the end it did manage to break out. We are now back above the area of support. In fact, we did retest from above the last level, or rather the first level of support from a high point of view, the 38.2% retracement, and found our initial reaction after this quite substantial downtrend. Now, the unfortunate part is that we actually failed to form here this idea of an impulse to the upside, and it was already quite fragile. This structure is clearly very choppy and we needed to actually hold here the $9 level. Now the area of support is slightly adjusted since the previous video because we did manage to extend a bit higher within this wave 3, but already the $9 level would have been able to tell that when broken it would be a failure of forming an actual impulse within this area, in which case I need to consider that this entire interpretation that this would be a larger wave 3 to the upside is not really applicable in this case, because we have an initial 5-wave move to the upside in a wave 1. We would expect to form an impulse within this wave 3, and this is not really happening right now. Sure, it could maybe form something like a large initial wave 1 to the upside. It could form a wave 2 correction and then form an impulse within the wave 3, but it doesn't seem too reliable. It doesn't seem like a pattern that would be highly probable to actually play out, and within such a large wave 1 it is much easier to actually expect it to form a completely different structure. Maybe something like an ABC movement instead, in which case we wouldn't need to form an impulse and a diagonal structure. An ending diagonal within this wave C would suffice. Now in the smaller time frame we have been also tracking this idea of a potential ABC structure to form the upside within this area, and this could also fit very well within this idea of a larger wave C, but in fact even this interpretation failed. So we are now actually seeing quite a lot of weakness on this chart, and it is getting quite difficult to track a reliable structure within this area. And even this I can actually just go ahead and remove. It's not really useful for us, and what I would instead consider to track is something more along the lines of possibly a larger ABC movement within this area. Now there are other interpretations possible, but nothing that would allow us to track a reliable direct 5-wave move to the upside, and I need to be open that this may be building an internal structure in an ABC movement part of a larger wave 1. Who knows, we may be building a large wave 1 to the upside. It's not impossible in the end, but I don't see a wave 3 building, at least momentarily. I don't see a wave C that has a clear path to building this structure as a wave C, because I would normally like to track this as a 1-2 setup even within the wave C, a third wave up, but within the wave 3 I would expect an ABC structure instead, and we got an something like a WXY rather. Not really, doesn't really work out, right? And then I would need still another ABC movement even after this correction is done within the large wave 4 for this wave 3. But again, we don't have a clear wave C within this area. We are lacking the structure that would suggest to us we should expect to form a wave 4 correction in a 1, 2, 3, 4th and 5th, and that is why I might even be rather considering this to be an ABC structure, and from or where it goes from this point I am not necessarily sure. It doesn't fit within the larger pattern either. It might need to actually form a more significant top. It might be that this is forming a slightly different interpretation of what we have here. Who knows, possibly we are even building an internal 1-2 setup in a very large wave C to the upside within this area. In the end, I don't really have the answers for this structure. It is difficult and I wouldn't necessarily try to force any interpretation, but I would rather recommend that since it is so unclear, this structure is so messy, we should perhaps not even focus too much on this chart. This is rather a signal that we should probably be more on the safe side and trade some of the more reliable charts that we have been tracking, for which we had areas of support that were much more reliable, and we were looking for continuation higher, and many of them have actually formed very, very significant rallies in the last couple of days, yeah, especially trading days, I mean. But yeah, right now, for the structure we have here on this chart, this is probably the interpretation that makes the most sense, at least here within the small time frame. Now, keep in mind also that overall, over the lifespan of this chart, there has been much less volume. What we have seen within this area is a much more representative indication of the overall market sentiment rather than the entire structure that has been built initially. Maybe we shouldn't even consider this initial structure to take part of this structure to the upside, and we should focus, yeah, maybe just on this structure as an ABC movement. It might make more sense. It is overall not a clear structure, and I would actually even need to allow here to see the 78.6% retracement within a different interpretation, of course, not for this wave 4, but even if it fails to hold this area of support, which is also not impossible, I could see this to form something like an ABC movement, as I was mentioning, and still succeed in the end, but it would be not reliable. I would still need to see a more reliable structure internally before I would be looking for a potential trade setup on this chart, and even then, due to the overall larger structure perspective, the larger pattern that is forming here, I would not necessarily recommend it still. Now, since this top that we have formed here within this supposed wave 3, we actually have a couple of options. So at least for now, we don't have a clear 5-wave move to the downside, but this doesn't mean one could not be forming right now, because I could be tracking this as an initial 1-2 setup, something like this, a third wave down, fourth wave up, and then a fifth wave that could still form to the downside. Now, this would of course be within a potential diagonal pattern. This would not be an impulse forming to the downside, but the main point is we could still further extensions lower, and we will be tracking just that within this orange interpretation, where in the smaller time frame I could actually even argue that this is in fact a 5-wave move to the downside in a 1, 2, 3, 4th, and a 5th. If we want, we can even check the levels of resistance. We would be looking here at the levels between, this is for a wave 4, the 23.6% retracement, $5.5, all the way up to the $6.1 level at the 61.8% retracement, where yes, we did manage to get here a brief break above, but it was just a tiny wick, and we still found resistance. We pushed once again into it and then pushed and formed an additional low. So from my perspective, we have here a potential 5-wave move to the downside, and I would consider this to be a potential ABC movement that could still form within this structure, and it would rather be even preferred in such an interpretation in such a case. And here we have this idea of the ABC, and we would need to allow this resistance area instead to go all the way up to the 78.6% retracement, in which case we see that clearly we pushed perfectly into the last level of resistance before stopping here, before getting this rejection. Now, if we assume that from a larger time frame perspective, this could be a tiny initial wave 1 to the upside, we could be looking for an area of support, and we will, but I'm telling you, it's just not a very reliable setup. It's not a very reliable structure to track as a 1-2 setup, and I would recommend to track this area of support for this movement, maybe from a larger time frame perspective. And remember that even though we may break here above the levels of resistance for this extension in the wave 5 in orange, there still is pressure to come from higher levels, because yeah, this is overall a short time frame downtrend, from which point we have formed a 3-wave move to the upside from the actual low, and we may still be looking at further continuation lower, since there are no reliable patterns to be tracked from this movement. Yeah, this could be something like an ABC, where in the wave C indeed we may form something like 1, 2, 3, 4th, and the 5th. It could work out like that, doesn't need to even, but indeed we still need to be prepared for further continuation, even if we manage to break above the short time frame pressure, because here, until we actually break above the 78.6% retracement at the $10.3 level, there are still good chances we may see further extensions lower. And for now, yeah, we still have lots of resistance ahead. We have unreliable patterns on the long side, and yeah, patterns that even could suggest in the very short time frame that we could see a direct downside potential. Yeah, especially if we don't break above the current wave B top that we have here in the smaller time frame. I would still be focusing on the downside until we see a break, another high, and I would still need to see actually a sustained break above the 78.6% retracement, because if we just get a higher week and then boom back down without breaking the beginning of the wave 5 top, yeah, the wave 4 top basically, this structure could still extend lower. Yeah, there is still possibility to extend lower as long as we don't actually form a higher high from the top in this wave 4 at that $7 level, yeah, around the 38.2% retracement, quite perfectly actually. And for now, these are the levels, this is the trade setup. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and let me know what else you want me to cover, and I'll do my best to do that in the days and weeks ahead. And until then, I hope you have a nice day, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.